I think these are all memories of the past. I came home late after 9 in the evening and found that my loving wife was not home. She didn't leave a message and there was nothing for me to eat. This wasn't the first time she had done this. I realized it wouldn't be. The last, was I angry? Well, no, not anymore. I had known for a long time that something was happening. Oh! I was probably angry, or should have been angry, at least at first. But what's that old saying? We learn to adapt, or we learn as we go. You see, that's what happened. My name is Chase Roster. I am 26 years old, 185 set tall, and weigh about 90 kilos. At 18, after graduating from high school, I went to work. I started as a carpenter, yes, just hammering nails. But I got the hang of it, made some friends, established some connections, and moved forward. About a year and a half ago, I became independent. I had little, very little money, but I still started living on my own. There are many people, well, not very many, but enough, who bought property and are looking for someone to build something for them. I am certainly not Frank Lloyd Wright, but I can build a separate lobby, a 2-story house, or a farm, just as well as anyone else. I'm doing well, really well, and I have friends and subcontractors who are also trying to make it on their own. It works for me all right. You know about me. Why am I late every evening? It's June now, the weather is good, and if I don't do it now, when will I? Now about my wife, a cheerful little brunette with brown eyes, a well-built beauty who thought she knew me and my schedule. Unfortunately, she thought she knew a lot more. Here's what happened. Susan, my wife, is 2 years younger than me. We met and started dating in high school. I fell in love and thought she fell in love with me too. Who knows? Maybe she did. She graduated from high school and we got married. Susan comes from a troubled family. She and her younger brother were raised by a single mother who worked 2 part-time jobs to support them. So after graduating, Susan had very few opportunities. We got married, and during the first year I continued hammering nails while Susan worked. As you might have guessed it, at the mall we were doing fine. We didn't have kids yet, and we weren't planning on having any until we saved up a bit for a house. Then Susan came up with some ideas. She said she wanted to improve herself and go to college. I was fully supportive and we got her into a local college nearby. Susan liked it. She decided she wanted to continue her education and study for 4 years. Not being very good at math but an avid reader, she chose something in psychology. She said that with a psychology degree, she could get a job in the local government or at a school, helping people, preferably children. I supported her. I paid for her tuition, books, and other necessary college supplies. Susan really put in her best effort. She reduced her hours at the mall and eventually quit to make the most of her time for classes and studying. It worked. Typically college takes 4 years, but Susan finished in 3.5. Everything seemed good, actually great, at least it seemed good to me. At some point though, Susan started getting other ideas. Is anyone surprised? Since all this came to light. I remember reading about it. I read about it online and in several books. I happened to get some extra materials from the public library and the local bookstore. Sure, I may not have finished college, but that doesn't make me a fool about. In the last year of Susan's studies, I started picking up subconscious signals, the usual things. Anyone who has ever been there knows what I mean. Eye-rolling, stating the obvious or giving evasive answers to legitimate questions, dismissive remarks, condescension, and what I would call hypercritical behavior. Who was Susan trying to fool? Gradually, she came to believe that thanks to a few college courses and term papers, she had become smarter and outgrown the person she once loved, but who still provided for her. I watched her. At first I ignored it, but as it got worse, I got angry, but I quickly realized that my anger was futile. I was just absorbing it anyway, and then my anger turned to sadness. Sure, I loved her, but I was young. If she had started getting apartment fever and wanted to leave, I would have been sad, but I would have dealt with it. That's about all that happened. So far I've just been rambling. I'll try as best as I can to tell you how everything finally started to fall apart. It was quite recently, maybe a year ago on a Tuesday evening. I came home late and Susan was waiting for me there. She was sitting at the kitchen table in our first rented house where I had been renovating the floors as part of a joint construction project. I walked through the door and saw her. She started, "Chase, I know you're tired, but we need to talk." I knew this was coming. I even knew who my archenemy was. I pulled out a chair. Our furniture was all secondhand. "All right, honey, what's up?" "Chase, I know we're married and I know I made promises, but I'm unhappy. I want to start dating other people, other men." That was bold. I expected her to ask for a divorce, but she was just beating around the bush, saying she wanted to date. Did she think I was a fool? Some kind of pushover? I sat there for a bit. I was tired, really exhausted, and was about to do something similar to what she had in mind. If we did that, she would cry and I would just get angrier. It didn't make sense. I needed to respond, but first I had to get a grip on myself for about 5 minutes. I just sat there, drumming my fingers on the table and staring at her. This had two effects. It helped me maintain my composure and scared her. I waited, and sure enough, she cracked and said, "I don't mean sex or anything like that. I just want to leave you see. I've met people who share my interests. Some of them get together and have well-grouped discussions, intellectual activities." Intellectual activities, group discussions, what nonsense. There were no group discussions or groups of people. It was one person, a psychology instructor, not a professor, a local college instructor. I knew him, had met him once or twice, a nice guy. His name was Ryan Fletcher. He considered himself a ladies' man, and I guess he was. He was about my height, but athletic, jogged, belonged to a sports club, and wore custom-tailored clothes. He drove a sports car. If you call the latest model Mustang a sports car, he drank wine and cocktails and I didn't. I hadn't had a drink since high school, not even beer. Come on, Susan wasn't my first girlfriend. There were others whom I thought I loved too, especially one. But I thought Susan and I had something special. I thought we were moving towards having a big house and our own kids. I would have been happy with a little girl who looked like Susan, and maybe a couple of boys who looked like me. I thought that's what everyone wanted. I thought that's what Susan wanted. I guess so. Growing impatient, and maybe a bit cautious, she looked at me more intently. "I don't mean I want to leave you. Chase, I love you. I really do. I'm serious. I still love you. I just want to spend more time outdoors, do other things, diversify, be more cosmopolitan." I listened. Damn that word. Cosmopolitan was a Fletcher. I had heard him use it. Finally, I replied, "You want a divorce? Is that it?" That's exactly how it was. I dumped it on the table. I thought she would either pounce on it or leave it lying there and sniff it. She decided to let it lie. She leaned back in her chair. Yes, I caught her there. I saw her get flustered. She turned pale and then brushed, No, I want to stay married. Justin, don't curse. My mom and dad raised me right," I responded. "You just want to have sex with Ryan Fletcher. Isn't that it?" This time she brushed to the roots of her hair. No, I'm faithful to you. I will stay faithful. I just want to be around people more, meet new people." She hesitated. She realized I knew more than she thought. "Did you mention Mr. Fletcher?" I thought Mr. Fletcher, I bet it was Ryan or Ryan Honey. When they were alone, I yawned and stretched. "Listen, I'm tired. I'm going to bed. You decide what you really want and tell me tomorrow night," I added. "Why don't you call your lover Ryan? If you need advice," then I continued. "And no sex tonight, you're probably full anyway." I got up and headed upstairs to go to bed. I assumed she followed me later. I don't remember falling asleep right away. Well, not quite immediately. I did think about things for a bit. The next morning I got up at my usual time, and she was already in the kitchen. She had made coffee. I rarely ate breakfast. Most often I stopped by Dunkin' Donuts, bought a pastry on the way, and grabbed a cup of something else. Susan had never disrupted my routine before, so I wasn't expecting anything different. That morning she always made me lunch, which was nice but nothing more. This morning I was both right and wrong. I went downstairs and she was awake waiting for me. She said, "Listen, honey, I was wrong about what I said last night. I want to take it back. Let's pretend I didn't say anything. I'm happy with you. Nothing else matters to me." She stepped forward. I think she expected a kiss or a hug, which was unlikely. I gave her what I hoped was a casual smile. "Never mind, will you be home tonight?" She became very serious, pretending to be sincere. "Of course I'll be home." As I walked out the back door, I reiterated what I had said the night before. "All right, well, discuss everything with Ryan and tell me what you've decided tonight," and headed down the path to my truck. As I was leaving, I heard her say behind the door, "Chase, I'm not seeing anyone, and certainly not Ryan." I simply turned and waved as I got into my truck. Who was she trying to fool? On the way to work, I started thinking in hindsight. I realized it's not a good idea to do that before work. As so much of the job relies on precision and safety, deep thoughts can interfere. Nevertheless, it was a cool 40-minute drive and I figured I could think a bit. And then once I got to work, sort everything out. I'm not an engineer, but I can't think analytically. I narrowed down my thoughts to 4, maybe 5, topics. First, I had my pride. I always thought I was enough for Susan. Along with that, I believed in her maturity and self-awareness. If I wasn't enough, and I'm not talking about sex, I mean, damn, I'm only 26 and there are no problems there. Then it was something else. Heck, Susan could use some help in that department herself. But that's another story. Of course, it had to be that mystic from college guys like Fletcher were sophisticated, and I was just a simple carpenter. It reminded me of the old Matt Damon movie Good Will Hunting. There was a scene where Matt totally owned a college guy in a bar, but in that movie many drivers saw through the pretense. In my case, Susan was too immature and starstruck to see the difference between the glitter that was Fletcher and what was real in me. It probably angered me that she couldn't see it, but there was nothing I could do about it. Worse, if she couldn't see it now, she never would that hurt. I loved Susan, but I understood that no matter how things turned out, if not now, then someday she would leave me for someone else. Now, secondly, what she said, and obviously what she was doing emotionally, if not physically, made me feel incredibly sad. It was unpleasant to admit, but last night, lying in bed alone, and this morning it was like watching someone slowly fade away. Dissolving into the distance, they become smaller and smaller until they are no longer visible. I think it's similar to death. She was drifting away. What Susan and I had was dying. I saw it, and it made me feel terrible. Thirdly, I think there was some anxiety about what others would think. I considered this, thought about who might care, and quickly dismissed it. I liked her mom and younger brother, but that would be their loss, not mine. My parents and brothers would be concerned, but once they knew what was happening, they would calm down. That left my colleagues and friends. Who cares about them? If it came to a divorce, and it probably would, they wouldn't take sides, and even if they did, it wouldn't matter. Then there was the financial aspect. We had a little money and we had no kids. But in the event of a divorce, my new business might require me to pay alimony in some form, at least until Susan got back on her feet. I didn't like how that sounded, but I figured there were ways around it. If I found the right lawyer, and finally, what about my personal well-being? I would certainly be heartbroken hell. I already was heartbroken, and I would be lonely too, at least for a while, although then again, maybe not. I married Susan because I loved her, but I had other girlfriends. There was one Ginger McAllister. I proposed to Susan, but Ginger was my second choice. Even better, during my marriage, Ginger had gotten married and divorced. I didn't just think I knew she got married because I did. She jumped into bed with another guy without hesitation. I wondered if she ever thought of me when she was in bed with her husband. I bet she did. I know I thought of her. Ginger was a nurse at the local hospital. She had a job and she had warm feelings for me. I knew she wasn't seeing anyone, and she was available. I had a good alternative and maybe a better choice. Sometimes that's how it goes. So I went at work, had a successful day, and headed home. When I got home, Susan was there. She had made a nice dinner and we ate after dinner. I brought up the topic, well, Susan, what have you decided? She reached out and took my hand. I love you, Chase. I'm sorry for what I said. It was stupid. I probably just didn't think. Then I said these group discussions and meetings with other men are not up for discussion. Oh, Chase, she began. I never meant anything like dating. I meant interacting with other men in group discussions. I didn't believe a word of it. She and Fletcher were up to something, but I didn't want to cause problems. They would just go ahead anyway. I said, listen, Susan, you have a degree in psychology. As soon as you find a job, you'll be using it to help people. I don't want to stand in your way. If group discussions, or whatever they're called, group seminars, will help you be better prepared and possibly find a job, then you should go for it. Do you think so? She asked. I gave her what I hoped was an approving but thoughtful smile. If you think it's a good idea, she closed the distance between us and climbed onto my lap. I don't think I need to do anything like that, but thank you for blessing me. I love you so much, honey. And with that, she kissed me deeply. Honestly, I thought I had just given her carte blanche. Now I bet she could go and jump into bed with Fletcher. As long as I didn't find out. I groaned. Listen, honey, I'm very tired and a truckload of supplies will be arriving early in the morning. Would you mind if we put everything off for one more night? Susan wrapped her arms around my neck. She gently kissed my lips. No, darling, we can wait. And then I realized from that moment on, I just needed to find a way to catch her. I stood up, kissed her again, and whispered, "All right, sweetheart. I love you too." With that, I want to bed. The next few days, throughout the weekend, life went on much the same. I came home after sunset, went straight to bed, woke up at dawn, and worked tirelessly. All this time, these matters gnawed at me. First, Susan still hadn't found a job. I was certain she and Fletcher were making love while I was at work. And equally unsettling was the thought that what I once believed we had was gone. I figured sooner or later I would have to get a grip and do something. Eventually, I decided to make a decision. I made one difficult and firm decision. I was certain they were meeting somewhere. I just didn't know where exactly if they were using my house. I decided I would crack Fletcher's skull if they were using his apartment, a motel, or some office at the college. I wouldn't be nearly as worried. In the same vein, I realized that it wasn't about Fletcher, but about Susan. Of course it was Fletcher, but if it wasn't him sooner or later, it would have been someone else. Oh. Fletcher was a jerk, a scoundrel, a frat boy who easily landed a job at a small, nowhere college. But he wasn't the problem. I needed to figure a few things out. First, I called a lawyer and arranged a meeting and a plan of action. Then I looked up Fletcher's address in the local directory. I also reviewed his credentials, a master's degree in psychology. In the end, not that impressive, right? Susan's car, her little Nissan, had GPS. I decided to use it to track her movements. I could keep an eye on her without disrupting my work. Susan also had a mobile phone. I could connect to it and read all her messages. All I needed to do next was gather some data and wait for the right moment. When I hired the lawyer, he explained that if we could persuade Susan to sign the divorce papers, I would probably have to pay her something, but I could keep her out of my business. Otherwise, he said, I could simply declare bankruptcy and start over after the divorce. I know that's an oversimplification, but it sounded right to me. Heck, I heard about a guy who restarted 4 times. I could do it once, and the only person I'd be firing would be myself. Well, not entirely. A few guys might get hurt too. Tracking Susan's actions was easier than I thought. She left the house every day around 11 a.m. and either headed to the local college or straight to 13,710. Maple Crest. In the Maple Crest area was Ryan Fletcher's apartment. He lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building that was part of a complex built in the 1970s. These places used to be nice, but they had changed significantly since then. I wondered if Susan understood what and who she was getting involved with. Given his qualifications and what I learned about college salaries, this Fletcher was likely at the lowest level. He was probably earning about half of what I made worse for Susan if she wasn't careful. Of course, that was a silly thought. By that time, I was already on the rise, while Mr. Ryan Fletcher was likely close to his peak. Anyway, I looked around and Susan's career choice was not so much bad as it was pointless. Psychologists with Susan's level of training were a dime a dozen, and Fletcher was just one step above her. In some ways, this made me feel even worse. Susan wasn't stupid. She had to understand that Fletcher's prospects weren't that bright. Was she really in love with this guy? And if so, was she so deeply in love that she was willing to give up the comfortable life? I could provide for a life that at best would be one of noble poverty. Was I really that bad? No, I didn't think so. I believed that Susan was in love with a concept, an idea. Instead of spending winters in the Bahamas, which of course was an exaggeration, or perhaps enjoying trips to big cities for shopping, theater and concerts, or just happily spending all the money I would earn, she would prefer to drink coffee or glasses of cheap wine. Sitting and talking about how gifted and smart they all were. Well, the choice was hers for my electronic surveillance. I gleaned one useful thing. It didn't seem like they were using our house as a love nest. But there was one unpleasant thing, really unpleasant, that caused me a lot of pain. Her text messages. I am not, and never have been, what I would call an overly sensitive or thin-skinned guy. Growing up with 2 older brothers knocked that out of me, but her messages were painful. They really hurt. I read that the words spoken by a cheating lover are rarely truthful. That might be true or it might not be. But it didn't matter. The words she said to Fletcher were hurtful. They caused a lot of pain. They were like a knife in my heart, a deep wound through which what was left of my love just drained away. So this brings us back to the night. When it all started, it was time to pull the trigger. As I said, I had discussed everything with my lawyer. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. If Susan needed a guy with a leather jacket, she could have him. I would move on. I would be fine. So before going to bed, I left a note on the table. I wanted to end it in the morning before leaving for work. It didn't go that way at all. I was about to drift off to sleep when I heard the sound of a car and then saw the lights. As Susan pulled into the driveway, I looked out the window. It was Susan and she wasn't alone. I pulled on shorts over my boxers and trudged down the stairs just in time to see Susan and Ryan Fletcher enter through the front door. Oh wow, I thought, what's this? Susan saw me and I flinched slightly. I also noticed Fletcher squeezing her hand, either a gentle rebuke or a sign of support. I assumed Susan looked up at me. I was still on the stairs, she said. Chase. I'm glad you're still awake, I nodded. I see you brought a guest. By that time, Susan was already holding the guy's hand. Yes, Ryan and I would like to talk to you. Oh my God. I thought that chickens have come home to roost. I smirked. Did we win the lottery or something? Susan tried to put on her most sincere and well-rehearsed face. Chase, please come downstairs. We need to talk. Without saying a word, I slowly descended the stairs. Whatever this was about, and I pretty much knew I wasn't going to make it easier than necessary. I got to the point, all right. What's going on? Susan responded. Can we go to the kitchen? I said. Sure, why not? As we walked in, I discreetly looked Mr. Ryan Fletcher up and down. He had the look of someone expecting trouble. I mentally laughed. He was truly ignorant. We went into the kitchen and all sat down at the table. It was their show, so I waited. After about a minute, Susan started. Chase, I'm kind of leaving you. Well, I thought, how can you kind of leave someone? I made every effort to keep my face as impassive as possible, judging by their expressions. I think I succeeded, I replied. Do you want this to happen? Fletcher opened his mouth. Susan and I have been thinking. I interrupted him. This is between Susan and me right now. When we're done, you two can pack her things. I'll even help. I looked at Susan. So how do we do this? She looked surprised and hurt when she said you didn't have to say that to Ryan. He's only here to help. Oh, I could have said a lot right then. But I remembered the movie The Godfather. Never let anyone know what you're thinking as calmly and evenly as possible. I said, you said you're leaving me. I understand he's here to help. I get that too. He can help you pack your things when we're done. So again, my question is, how do we do this? Susan was on the verge of breaking down, and I remembered my conversations with the lawyer. He said that when the bullet hits the bone, Susan might crumble and I might have to push her. Pride works both ways. He had said, Susan said, he don't really want a divorce. I would like to be able to. I stopped her. It was hammer time. I agree. I said. She was shocked. You agree to what? I replied. I do want a divorce. I've already met with a lawyer. He has prepared all the papers. We'll sell the house. We don't have any equity, so it will probably lose money, but I'm willing to cover any losses. As for the stuff, most of it is used or old. I have a few things and you do too. We can pick the few things we need and either sell or donate the rest regarding the money. If you agree to just let me go, I'll split what we've saved 60-40 and you'll get 60. Susan was stunned and at a loss for words. Then Fletcher stepped in. Susan loves you. She doesn't want a divorce. She just wants to be able to see me and maybe take a few trips. I ignored him but responded to his comment through Susan. I said, I want a divorce, and then I lied. I found someone else. I want to move on. She looked shocked, absolutely stunned. You found someone else. I stuck to my story. When I found out about you two, I realized it was over between us and moved on. Now, Susan, will you let me go, please? It's all because of Ginger McAllister, isn't it? Susan retorted. She was in my grasp. As the old saying goes, pride goes before a fall. Susan got angry. I had cut her off at the pass. I delivered a sharp blow. Yes, she was on the defensive again. My response I'd rather not say in a tone like a cobra. Susan hissed. Fine, Chase. You've got it. Have your lawyer send his papers and I'll sign them. I release you. I stood up. I'll call him first thing in the morning. I'll personally make sure you get them tomorrow. I assume you'll be at Ryan's. Susan, squaring her shoulders, eyes flashing and bristling, replied. Yes, I'll be at Ryan's. I said casually, all right. Then I looked at Fletcher. Shall we start packing? He looked as if he had been struck by lightning. At that moment I realized Susan had messed up. He's Sandwell. I think. I said, good. Let's get started, and looked at Susan. You gather your toiletries. Ryan and I will get the rest of your things. After that, everything went pretty quickly. Susan packed her perfumes and soap into a travel bag. Ryan and I carried all her clothes to the car. It was a tight fit, but we managed to get everything done in less than an hour. I walked him to her car, fully loaded with her things. He sat in the passenger seat. I held the driver's side door open. As Susan got inside, she rolled down the window chase. "I'm sorry, you know. I really do love you." I honestly admitted I know I watched as my wife and her boyfriend drove off into the night. I went upstairs, checked Susan's empty closet, and looked around the room. Everything was the same, yet everything had changed. I glanced at the clock. It was 10 minutes past midnight. I took out my phone and called Jack Slattery, one of my workers. "Jack, I won't be in tomorrow." "Yeah. Susan and I agreed on a divorce, so I'll be handling that tomorrow. Can you take care of everything for me?" He apologized, but also promised he would handle everything I knew he would. Was it the end? Well, what? Yes and no. Let me explain what happened next. First, I cried for most of that first night. I owed it to myself and to Susan to cry it out, to let it all out, so to speak. After all, I really did love her, and I knew that despite the circumstances, she loved me too. But she just didn't have the strength of character to keep it together. The next morning I met with my lawyer, or at least his secretary. I picked up the papers and went to Fletcher's apartment. Susan opened the door. Ryan was still asleep. I assumed she had been through a lot. I could see that she had been crying too. She didn't even read the documents she just signed everywhere. The lawyer's secretary had indicated in 15 minutes. I left essentially a free man. What happened next a lot. I had the house appraised and found out it was worth even less than I thought, instead of putting it up for sale. I met with my parents, got an interest-free loan from them, and after my brothers agreed, of course we didn't want any family disputes, I bought out Susan's half. I agreed to support Susan and pay for her phone for 6 months. I figured that was enough time to give her a chance to get settled. She hadn't read any of the paperwork and didn't know anything about this. So I came out and swathed. I threw myself into work. I worked as hard as I could, and before long my results were better than ever. Then there was another matter. I needed to take care of my personal life. I wanted to visit Ginger. Susan was a stunning beauty, chestnut hair, big brown eyes, a great figure, not great in bed but a feast for the eyes. Ginger was different. Ginger was pretty short like Susan, with red hair, freckles and green eyes. But that's where the similarities ended. Ginger was flat as a board, skinny with stick-like legs. Worse yet, while Susan, despite all her flirtatious nature, turned out to be quite meek and easy to get along with, Ginger was the complete opposite. I remembered her fiery temper, outbursts of blatant anger, and tendency toward unexpected violence. One thing I vividly recalled when Ginger was with me, she had bouts of jealousy that bordered on rage, yes, and I would never have to worry about her playing the Fletcher game. Did I want to go back to that? The answer, yes. I quickly realized that Susan was at least boring. Ginger was a fiery volcano, always on the verge of eruption, especially when we were together, and especially when it came to me. In fact, as soon as she realized I had chosen Susan, she almost attacked her. I want to see Ginger God, what a fitting name for a girl with her looks. I called her first. She wasn't thrilled about meeting me, but she eventually agreed. We arranged to have dinner together. I took her to Olive Garden. I took her hands and... Oh, I had forgotten how stunning she could look. Her hair was braided into a long plait. Her large green eyes adorned with light brown eyeshadow, long lashes, and small, delicate hands with nails covered in clear polish. Her outfit was simply killer. She wore a lemon green silky blouse with buttons made of some fine material that made her tiny breasts appear to flow. I mean, they swayed like waves lapping at the shore. I swear she wasn't wearing a bra, and the top 3 buttons were undone. The skirt she wore was made of the same light, pleated fabric and only reached mid-thigh. As she walked, it fluttered around her slender legs. Those slender legs were adorned with knee-high socks, and her feet were in cheap moccasins. Simply charming, and her face heart-shaped with a teardrop-shaped mouth, a slightly upturned nose, high cheekbones, and a sprinkle of freckles that stretched across her nose and cheeks like a tiny mountain range. Then she opened her mouth and I fell in love all over again. Oh, how could I have forgotten the melodic tones of her soft, gentle voice? It was like a spring morning, the song of a songbird, the joyful, lyrical tune of a nightingale. She was rather silent until we entered the restaurant and sat down at the table. Then she said to me, "Hat, she said, got tired of that beauty and decided to come to me, back to second place. The nightingale turned into a hawk. It was amazing. I liked it, I shot back, that's right. So how about it? She hit me right where it hurt, you know. I was already married, so you missed your chance. I remembered she was a devout Catholic. I hadn't made any moves. When we dated, I replied, that's okay. I won't rush things. She still wasn't finished this time. There's no going back and for a penny in for a pound. I responded, I'll take what I can get, even if it's left in reserve. Then it hit me and she finished me off completely. My first marriage was a failure, she said. This time I want a fairy tale. I was ready. Do you want to eat first? Or should we go pick out a ring? She jumped up laughing, let's go, you fool. We got married in the fall, a grand wedding, as I mentioned. She was a Catholic, came from a big family and had big hopes. I was a Methodist, so it didn't matter. She was a beautiful bride. The tiny street urchin was led to the altar by a red-haired giant who shone like the lighthouse of Alexandria. Since then, I haven't looked back once, made one mistake, and I won't make another. So what happened to Susan? Ryan wanted her. He loved her, but he just wouldn't marry her. Poor foolish Susan. She resorted to the oldest and dumbest trick in the book. She stopped taking her pills, thinking if she got pregnant, he would marry her. She got pregnant, but he left for the mountains. Ginger and I see her now, and then we're not pregnant yet, but we're working on it. Poor Susan, she has a psychology degree, but she's good for nothing. She has about 5 months left until she gives birth, and yes, she's working at the mall. I tell everyone it wasn't my fault. I feel a bit sorry for her. She ended up just like her mom and me. It seems like it's all happily ever after here. Yes, indeed, life goes on. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode of English Epic. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.